The Arizona territory held its heat long after sunset, as if the land itself refused to let go. Even when the sun sank behind the jagged western mesas, late summer of 1879 clung to the ground like a memory that would not fade. Daytime's fire merely settled into embers, waiting for morning to breathe it alive again. When the wind stirred, it offered no mercy. It drifted low and slow, the desert's own breath, heavy with dust and the faint promise of rain that never quite arrived. Red stone cliffs rose beneath a sky crowded with stars, their silhouettes resembling the fossilized remains of creatures older than time. Bones from an age when this land slept beneath an ancient sea. Talon moved through the desert as if he belonged to it. He did not walk like a stranger passing through, but like something rooted to the soil itself. His moccasins recognized every grain of sand, every hidden shard of shale beneath the surface. At 30, his face bore the markings of wind and sun, etched by years lived outdoors. His eyes carried the calm vigilance of a man who understood that silence spoke louder than words out here. Once, he had worn the blue coat of an army scout, leading soldiers who viewed the land as an enemy to be broken. He had learned their language, their customs, and the hollow look that settled behind their eyes. Eventually, he walked away from them. He traded the stale rations of military forts for open air and the unforgiving labor of breaking wild horses. Each Mustang he sold brought him closer to owning land of his own, a stretch near a spring that never ran dry. His father's lesson echoed in him. Where there is water, there is tomorrow. That truth was enough for Talon. Tonight, he followed the tracks of a lone buckskin Mustang that had peeled away from its herd. The prints were fresh, angling toward a shallow cut locals called Bitter Wash, a place named for its usual emptiness. Recent rains, however, meant water might be waiting, enough to lure a thirsty animal. Talon moved with measured efficiency, every step quiet, every motion spare, until he blended with the shadows themselves. Then he heard it. Not an owl, not a coyote. A voice, a woman's voice, low and gentle, singing. The sound felt wrong in the vast stillness, so out of place that Talon paused, wondering if the desert was playing tricks on him. A spirit, perhaps, the echo of water remembering itself. He stood motionless, letting the sound drift over him. The melody was simple and aching, fragile against the endless night. Drawn by something deeper than instinct, he followed it. He reached the edge of the wash and looked down. A thin crescent moon hung overhead, its pale light turning scattered pools into sheets of silver. In the widest pool stood a woman. Her back faced him. Moonlight washed over skin so pale it seemed to glow. Her dark hair fell loose down her back, heavy and unbound. She was bathing, her movements slow, exhausted. The song barely rose above a whisper, meant for no one but herself. Talon knew he should leave. A white woman alone in Apache land was danger enough to get a man killed. He began to step away. Then her song faltered, breaking into a quiet sob. The sound struck him harder than a blow. He stopped, concealed in the brush, standing guard without meaning to. Her name was Eden Whitfield, though she was already trying to leave it behind. She had walked for days, guided only by the North Star, fleeing the life she left in Colorado. She escaped a fine house where windows stayed shut and silence carried threat. Her husband, Vance Whitcomb, had built his fortune tearing silver from mountains and treated her no differently. To him, she was property, a polished Boston ornament to own and control. The last time his hand rose against her, something inside Eden shattered beyond repair. She took what little she could, a dress, a scrap of bread, a few coins, and ran. A kind freighter gave her passage south until his route ended, leaving her with a canteen and a loose promise of a town called Santa Esperanza, hope. The word had felt cruel after days beneath the sun. Now, the creek's cool water felt like salvation, washing fear from her skin. For a heartbeat, moonlight wrapped her like silk. She had never felt so alone and never so free. The song was one her mother once sang, filled with longing and distant shores. Tears slid freely. When Eden turned to leave the pool, her foot slipped on slick stone. Pain flared as her ankle twisted, and she fell backward into the water with a sharp cry. Before panic could fully take hold, movement burst from the shadows. A tall figure closed the distance with silent speed. Her heart slammed wildly. This was it. This was how it ended. All the running, all the hope, finished here. Talon reached her in seconds. Terror stared back at him from wide, shining eyes as moonlight caught her face. He turned his face away on purpose, fixing his eyes on the far side of the wash as he bent down. His grip was firm and controlled when his hands closed around her upper arms, lifting her from the water as though she carried no weight at all. He placed her carefully on the sandy bank, then stepped back at once, angling his body away to give her privacy without saying a word. Slipping the rough wool cloak from his shoulders, he held it out to her, his gaze still deliberately averted. Eden stared at the cloak, her thoughts lagging behind the moment. He was not hurting her. He was helping her. Her teeth began to tremble, from cold as much as shock. She accepted the cloak, her fingers brushing his. His skin was warm. She wrapped the heavy fabric around herself, pulling it tight over her shivering frame. The cloth was coarse, but strangely comforting. It smelled of sage, smoke, and horse. "Thank you," she whispered. Her voice sounded thin, unsteady. Talon finally looked at her then, taking in her pale features and the way she clutched the cloak like armor. Even frightened, she carried herself with restraint. She was Eastern-born. That much was obvious in the clean line of her jaw, the trained posture of her shoulders. "You're hurt," he said. It was a statement, not a question. His English was steady, marked only by the softer cadence of his native tongue. "My ankle," she managed, glancing down. It was already swelling. He lowered himself to one knee, movements smooth and practiced. His hands examined her ankle with careful neutrality, fingers testing lightly. "It's not broken," he said at last. "But you won't be walking on it tonight." He stood. "I have a fire, not far." Eden hesitated. Every story she had ever heard, every warning whispered back east about savages and the wilderness, told her to refuse. Yet the quiet dignity in his stance, the respect he had shown without question, cut against all of it. She was cold, injured, alone. Staying here meant a slower death. "All right," she said, her voice steadier now. He nodded once. Talon built a small fire beneath an overhanging rock, using dry wood that burned clean and low. A scout's fire. The flames painted their faces in warm, shifting light. Without ceremony, he handed her a strip of dried meat and a piece of hard corn cake. Eden ate, startled by how hungry she truly was. They sat in silence. Only the soft crackle of flame and the deep breathing of the desert filled the space between them. "You don't have a horse," Talon said at last. "No supplies," Eden replied. "I lost them." The lie tasted awkward on her tongue. "Who are you traveling with?" She stared into the fire, watching the flames dance. "No one." Talon absorbed that. A woman alone. Worse than he had thought. Irritation flickered through him, not toward her, but toward the situation itself. The desert taught its lessons hard. First, share water. Second, Mind your own path, because trouble spread fast in dry country. A white woman beside an Apache invited trouble. He knew what white men assumed. He had seen the price paid for it. Still, leaving her here would be a death sentence. The code his people taught him long before the army would not allow that. "At first light," he said flatly, "I'll take you to Cedar Spur, trading post. From there you can find a way on." Eden studied his face, the harsh lines softened by firelight. There was no warmth in his expression, only resolve. It was enough. "Thank you," she said again, this time meaning it fully. Grace was a rare thing. She had not known it until now. The next day's journey was slow and wordless. Talon cut her a sturdy branch for a crutch and walked ahead, shortening his stride to match hers. His rifle rested loose in his hand. He said nothing, and Eden did not press him. Heat pressed down from above. The land blurred into reds, browns, and pale blue haze. Cedar Spur was no town, just a cluster of low adobe buildings clinging to dust and necessity. The air stank of sweat, sour whiskey, and manure. A few exhausted horses stood tied to a rail, heads hanging low. As they approached, men on the porch fell silent and turned to stare. Their eyes lingered on Eden, curious, appraising, unashamed. She pulled Talon's cloak tighter around herself. She felt their looks like hands. Her chin stayed lowered, yet she felt the men's stares like hands pressing against her skin. A familiar knot tightened in Talon's gut. He knew these men, or ones just like them. They lived on suspicion and boredom, and that pairing made men reckless. He guided Eden toward the trading post, his expression carved into stone. Inside, the air cooled slightly, but hung thick with the odors of leather, tobacco, and ground flour. A broad-shouldered man in a stained apron stood behind the counter. Still, it was another figure who caught Talon's eye. A lone man seated at a small table near the wall. He was lean, sun-darkened, as though the desert had baked him hard. His clothes were worn thin, but his gun belt was clean and well kept. His pale eyes followed them without blinking. A bounty hunter, Talon judged at once. The man's gaze kept drifting back to Eden. Before Talon could speak to the trader, one of the porch men swaggered inside with two others at his heels. He was large, loose-limbed, his confidence fueled by liquor and the safety of numbers. "Well now," he drawled, his voice filling the quiet room. "Look what the Apache dragged in. Found yourself a real pretty thing out there in the sage, didn't you, Chief?" Eden flinched. Talon stepped half a pace in front of her, his body an unspoken barrier. He said nothing. His silence carried more weight than a threat. Still, the big man pushed on. "What's the matter?" he sneered. "She don't speak English?" "I could teach her a few words." He moved closer, a slick grin spreading across his face. Talon knew how fast this could turn. A fight here would solve nothing and draw eyes that mattered, especially from the man in the corner. This had to end now. In a way these men understood. In their world, only ownership carried meaning. He turned his head slightly, dark eyes locking onto the drunk's stare. His voice stayed low and steady, slicing through the air. "Choose your words carefully," Talon said. "You're talking about my wife." The sentence dropped into the room like a stone. The big man blinked. His smile wavered. His companions shifted uneasily. Eden's breath caught as she stared at Talon's back, her thoughts spinning. His wife. In the corner, Rook Slater leaned forward just enough to show interest. He had come to Cedar Spur chasing a rumor. a whisper of a high society woman, vanished from Colorado. $1,000 bounty offered by her powerful husband, Vance Whitcomb. Red hair, unmistakable. The woman wrapped in the Apache's cloak wore her hat low, but Slater caught the glint of copper strands flashing in a stray beam of sunlight. The drunk muttered under his breath. After a moment's hesitation, he backed away, his friends retreating with him. Even an Apache's wife was off limits in their code. Talon turned to the trader, ignoring Eden's shock and the bounty hunter's watchful stare. He bought flour, coffee, and bandages. As he paid, he felt Slater's eyes boring into his spine. The lie had worked, but it had also marked them. Outside, the heat felt heavier. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called, sharp and wrong for the middle of the day. "Why did you say that?" Eden whispered, her voice tight. "It was the only word they respect." Talon answered, scanning the area. "We have to leave, now." "You said you would leave me here." "I can't." His jaw hardened. "The man inside, the one watching, he's a hunter. And I think you're what he's hunting." At that moment, Slater stepped out of the trading post. He headed toward his horse, but his eyes stayed on them. A slow smile crossed his face, empty and cold. "Take good care of your new bride," he called. "Apache," Slater added smoothly. "A woman like that, a man would want to hold on tight." His gaze lingered on Eden's hair. "This isn't finished," he said softly, "for their ears alone." Then he swung into the saddle and rode off, not hurried, but purposeful. Talon watched him go. He had seen enough. The main roads were no longer an option. The lie had bought them a sliver of time, but it had also bound their fates together. Talon looked at Eden Whitfield, at the fear and uncertainty flickering in her eyes. "There are other paths," he said quietly, his tone steady. "Apache trails. They won't find us there." The decision settled in him without debate. Her danger was his now. He would not take her toward the next settlement. Instead, he would lead her through the core of the land he knew, a country that either sheltered its own or swallowed them whole. He did not know her story or where she truly came from, but he had called her his wife. In the desert's hard logic, that was truth enough. They left the boiling dust of Cedar Spur behind, stepping away from wagon ruts into a track so faint it barely marked the earth. Talon moved forward with a measured, tireless stride, and Eden followed. Her world shrank to the steady width of his back and the constant ache pulsing through her injured ankle. This desert was not the one travelers knew. White men's trails chased ease, following water and skirting the worst ground. Apache paths were different, stitched directly into the land, a hidden script written in rock and shadow. They crossed ridges of sun-scorched stone that seemed impassable, and slipped down twisting canyons that erased the sky. At first, fear sat heavy in Eden's stomach. Every unfamiliar sound, every rustle of brush, sent sharp panic through her. She was a woman shaped by Boston, by cobblestone streets and lamplit parlors. This world of thorns, heat, and glare felt as foreign as another planet. Her fine leather shoes, already scraped and splitting, stood no chance against jagged stone. Her dress, meant for polite afternoons, tore and stained. With each mile, her former life was stripped away, leaving only the raw, struggling woman beneath it. Talon seemed to notice everything and comment on nothing. When her ankle finally failed and she fell onto gravel, scraping her palm, he did not rush forward with comfort. He simply stopped, waiting. When she rose again, jaw tight against the pain, he pointed to a plant with thick, fibrous leaves. Chew the bark, he said evenly. It makes a paste. Keeps wounds clean. He showed her by stripping a piece, working it between his teeth, then spreading it on a shallow cut on his own arm. Only then did he hand her a fresh strip. The lesson was unmistakable. Out here, sympathy was a luxury. Knowledge kept you alive. Days blurred together beneath the relentless sun. Eden learned a new creed. She learned that a faint shimmer in distant cottonwood leaves meant water lay close below the ground. She learned that the angle of tiny creosote blossoms told the hour. She learned to lift her eyes from her feet and read the land ahead. Color, texture, shadow, the desert's map, as Talon called it. One afternoon, resting beneath the thin shade of an Apollo Verde tree, their water ran dangerously low. She watched him split open a thick yucca leaf. He held it up. This plant wears a skin that catches the morning dew. He scraped a few glistening drops into a small gourd cup. White men call it Spanish dagger, he said. My people call it the hand of the sky. It gives what it can. The water barely wet her tongue, yet it tasted like life. In moments like these, the rigid layers of her old world began to fall away, replaced by something sharper and clearer. Boston's strict rules seemed absurd now. What did manners matter when survival hinged on finding water? Their exchanges became short and practical. We rest here. The ground's loose. Move slow. Between them, a fragile trust took root in the dry soil, fed by cautious curiosity. You don't speak like other Army scouts I've known, Eden said one night as they shared a small rabbit Talon had snared. He shrugged, turning the meat above the smokeless fire. I listened. Most of them just talked. You mean they only talked? She corrected gently. A habit too old to break. A faint smile touched his mouth. Brief warmth across his stern face. Out here, he said, the only language that matters is water. Eden smiled back. Not the careful, trained expression of her past, but something real. I suppose it is, she said softly, then paused. Then she asked him why he had left the army. The faint trace of a smile vanished at once. Talon stared into the fire until his face hardened again. They wanted me to lead them against my own people, he said quietly. I took their pay to guide them, not to help them kill my kin. The words were soft, but they carried a weight Eden could feel, even if she did not yet fully understand it. In that moment, she saw the fracture inside him, the shadow of a man split between two worlds. She belonged to neither of them either. Her own battle pressed just as hard. Beneath the star-choked sky, the teachings of her past crept back into her thoughts. A lady does not travel unchaperoned with a man, least of all a savage. A wife owes obedience to her husband, no matter his cruelty. The voices of her father, her minister, all of Boston society, crowded her mind. They accused her of recklessness, of disgrace, told her she should turn back, find the nearest town, send a telegram to Vance Whitcomb and beg forgiveness. But then his face would rise before her, his eyes cold with fury, the grip of his hand like iron on her arm. And something fierce awakened inside her. An instinct she had never known she possessed surged forward. It told her to keep moving, to keep following this quiet, capable man who had, for reasons she did not yet grasp, chosen to protect her. The sandstorm struck without warning. One moment the sky was a clean, endless blue. The next, the horizon curdled into a sick yellow wall, and the wind began to howl through the canyons. Talon stopped abruptly, lifting his face, scenting the air like an animal. We need shelter, he said, urgency cutting through his calm. He seized her hand and pulled her with him. They scrambled up a rough rock face toward a shallow cave he had already spotted. A dark opening carved into the cliff. They barely made it inside before the world outside vanished. The storm roared like a living thing, a blinding, screaming fury of sand. The noise battered the stone, vibrating through their bones. Fine grit seeped into the cave, coating skin, hair, and breath itself. They crouched together at the back, the space so tight their shoulders pressed against each other. For hours they sat in the darkness as the storm tried to erase the world. It forced an intimacy neither could escape, a shared helplessness deeper than words. When the wind finally began to weaken, Talon uncorked his canteen. Eden saw at once how little remained, less than a quarter full. Their last water. Without speaking, he held it out to her. She looked from the canteen to his face, barely visible through dust and shadow. His lips were cracked, his features caked in grit. Eden lifted the canteen, took the smallest sip possible, then handed it back. Talon nodded once, acknowledging the choice, and took a brief drink himself. In that silent exchange, something shifted. They were no longer simply an Apache and a woman from Boston. They were two people keeping one another alive. When the storm passed, the desert emerged scrubbed clean. The air felt new, sharp, reborn. Eden felt the same change within herself, a quiet sense of renewal, of possibility. That night, as they sat beside their small fire, she knew she had to trust him fully. She reached into a hidden pocket sewn into the lining of her petticoat and drew out a folded piece of deerskin. It was soft with wear, its markings sketched in charcoal. The lines trembled, drawn by a hand weakened by age or illness. "When I first ran," she said softly, "I became sick. A fever. I don't know how long I was unconscious." Talon looked up from sharpening his knife, his full attention fixed on her now. "When I woke, I was in a small hut. An old woman was caring for me, an Apache woman." She continued. "She gave me herbs and water. She never told me her name. When I was strong enough to leave, she gave me this." Eden unfolded the map. "She said it was meant for her son, that he would understand it. She told me if I was ever truly lost, I should follow it, that it would lead me somewhere safe." Talon reached out. For the first time, his hands trembled as he took the deerskin. His eyes traced the charcoal lines in silence. Then he touched one symbol, a careful drawing of a balanced rock. "Cache Rock," he whispered, the name rough in his throat. He lifted his gaze to Eden. In his eyes, she saw something raw and aching. Grief laid bare. "These markings," he said, voice unsteady. "This is my mother's hand. Her name was Nokai. She was a healer, a midwife." The truth hung between them, as shocking and sudden as the storm itself. The kindness that had saved Eden's life had not been chance. It was a thread, binding her to this man, to his past. From that moment on, the journey was no longer just an escape from danger. Now the journey had a direction, a reason. They traveled 2 more days, bound by a new, unspoken companionship. The map guided them, though Talon scarcely needed it. He knew this land by memory. Cache Rock belonged to his boyhood, fixed deep in his mind. It rose from the plain like a watchful giant. One massive red boulder balanced impossibly atop another, standing guard over the open country. Talon led Eden Whitfield to its base, where a dense juniper concealed the stone. He knelt, shifting smaller rocks aside until a hidden cavity revealed itself. From the hollow, He drew out a heavy leather pouch, darkened by age and stiff with time. It was bound with a rawhide thong. They sat together as he loosened it. Everything inside had been placed with care. First, he removed a small journal wrapped in leather. The pages were filled with his mother's graceful hand, a blend of Apache symbols and Spanish words. A dry, herbal scent drifted from it, as if the plants she once used still lingered there. Next came folded papers, official documents stamped by a territorial office. Talon opened them slowly. They were identification papers, and the name written there made Eden inhale sharply. They were issued to a woman called Eden Moore. He looked again, closer. The ink was smudged, but unmistakable. Beneath the name was a description: widow, mixed heritage, born in the territory. It was a new life on paper, a safe life, a way for a woman to vanish and begin again, shielded from the men who hunted her. Nokai, wise even beyond her years, had prepared an escape for someone not yet known. That it carried Eden's name felt impossible, like a quiet miracle hidden in the wilderness. At the bottom of the pouch lay a final folded scrap of hide. Talon opened it carefully. In his mother's hand, a single sentence written in Spanish waited. He translated aloud, his voice thick. Choose your family with your heart. They sat in silence as the sun sank, bathing Cache Rock in deep orange and violet. The land itself seemed to pause. A mother's love, preserved across years, had revealed itself. For Talon, it was a reunion with a ghost. For Eden, it was the promise of a future she had never dared imagine. They had come as fugitives. They left with a legacy. The pouch weighed more than leather and paper. It carried responsibility. Hope his mother had entrusted to him without asking, yet one he could no longer refuse. The documents naming Eden Moore, widow, woman of the territory, were a key, a doorway out of the life that pursued her. Nokai's healer's wisdom had seen the sickness long before it showed its face. As they moved away from Cache Rock, the silence between them changed. It was no longer the quiet of strangers sharing danger, but the hush of two people weighing an uncertain future together. The land remained harsh, but a purpose had taken root beneath their flight. They could not survive forever on knowledge alone. They needed salt, ammunition, supplies, if they were to reach Santa Esperanza. Hope no longer felt like a cruel word to Eden. It felt like a place calling her name. The nearest post for provisions was Bitter Springs, larger and busier than Cedar Spur. It was a gamble. A wolf does not return to a valley where it has been spotted, and Rook Slater was a wolf of patience and persistence. Still, necessity drew its own lines across the land. Bitter Springs shimmered beneath the noon sun. A scattering of adobe buildings pulsed with sluggish life. From the saloon came the low murmur of voices. The steady ring of a blacksmith's hammer marked the hours. They walked down the single dusty street, leading the sturdy pony Talon had acquired in trade for a well-cured hide. Eden felt eyes everywhere. An Apache man and a white woman, her face shaded by a wide-brimmed hat, were more than a curiosity here. They were a story, and most men preferred violent endings. Talon's hand hovered near the pistol at his hip. His movements stayed calm, deliberate. His gaze swept the street, counting men, horses, open doors. He saw him before Eden did. Rook Slater leaned against the wall of the general store, as if he had been waiting all morning. He was not alone. Two men stood with him, wearing the same empty, hardened expressions. Drifters, men who sold their loyalty to the highest bidder. The Slater cutthroats had found them. Rook Slater pushed away from the wall, a slow, hunting smile spreading across his sun-scorched face. He stepped forward, deliberately cutting off their path. "Well now," Slater drawled, his voice slick with false surprise. "If it isn't the happy couple. I was just telling my associates here about you. A real love story." The two men beside him shifted outward, hands hovering near their pistols. It was a textbook snare, and the street suddenly felt too narrow to breathe. "We don't have business with you," Talon said evenly. He stopped and placed himself squarely between Eden Whitfield and the bounty hunter. "Oh, I think you do," Slater purred. He tipped his hat in a mockery of manners, his eyes never leaving Eden. "Ma'am, my apologies for the confusion back in Cedar Spur. Name's Rook Slater. I've been hired by your husband, Mr. Vance Whitcomb, to see you return safely. He's been beside himself with worry." A wave of nausea rolled through Eden. Hearing her husband's name spoken here made her skin crawl. Slater's polite tone was far more frightening than a shouted threat. He was shaping a story for the crowd, casting himself as savior, Talon as savage kidnapper. "He knows you must be terrified," Slater went on, voice thick with manufactured concern. "Dragged across the desert by him. But it's over now. We're here to take you home." This was the hinge of her life, the moment everything would turn. The woman she had once been, the Boston lady, would have shrunk back. She would have cried or frozen and let Slater decide the truth. But that woman no longer existed. The woman who stood here had crossed deserts, learned to bind her own wounds, learned what water meant. She carried a new name folded in leather, a name that meant freedom. She intended to deserve it. Before Talon could speak, before his hand could drop to his gun, Eden stepped out from behind him. She moved with a calm that surprised even herself. Her hand settled on Talon's arm, firm and unmistakable. Possession. Choice. She lifted her chin and met Slater's cold stare without flinching. "There must be some mistake, sir," she said clearly, her voice carrying down the dusty street. "My husband is standing right here." Her fingers tightened on Talon's arm. "I am Mrs. Nantan. We were simply buying supplies." For a heartbeat, Slater had no words. His smile cracked. His two cutthroats exchanged uncertain glances. Of all the outcomes he had prepared for, tears, fear, pleading, this had not been one of them. A woman claiming an Apache as her husband, looking at him as though he were the intruder. Talon seized the opening she had created. While Slater and his men struggled to regain balance, he turned toward the cantina beside them. An older Mexican man stood in the doorway, drying a glass. Esteban Cruz, the proprietor, had been watching everything. Talon spoke quickly in fluent Spanish, learned long before the army ever found him. "Friend," he said, respectful but urgent, "these men are looking for trouble. My wife and I mean none to this town. Please keep women and children inside. I'd hate for anyone to be hurt by their foolishness." Cruz's eyes moved from Talon to Eden, then to Slater's hard face. He gave a short nod. Understanding. He vanished back into the cantina, barking orders in Spanish. Doors closed, windows shuttered. The message was unmistakable. Talon was not a reckless stranger. He was a man trying to prevent bloodshed. Slater and his men were the threat. The ground beneath them shifted. Slater recovered, his expression twisting into a sneer. "Cute little performance," he said, "but it doesn't change who you are." He jabbed a finger toward Eden. "You're Eden Whitfield, and you're coming with me. The law's on my side. The law doesn't give you the right to threaten a man's wife." Talon replied, his voice dropping into something dangerously calm. She's not your wife, Slater snapped, composure slipping. She's property, my employer's property, and I'm here to collect. One of the cutthroats, a lanky man with a nervous twitch, made his move. His hand jerked toward his pistol. It was a fatal mistake. Talon's draw wasn't flashy, not the blur sung about in dime novels. It was older than that. Quieter, more final. The motion was so clean and efficient, it seemed the pistol simply existed in his hand. Two sharp reports split the air. So close together, they sounded like a single shot. The lanky man screamed and collapsed, clutching his knee as he hit the dirt. The second cutthroat jerked back, as if struck hard in the chest, a dark bloom spreading across his shoulder before the force spun him around. His revolver fell from his grasp and clattered into the dust. Talon had not killed them. He had not meant to. Every movement was precise, disciplined, the work of a warrior, not a butcher. The threat had been dismantled, piece by piece. He stood now with his pistol leveled squarely at Rook Slater's chest. The bounty hunter froze, his own hand stalled halfway to his gun, disbelief etched across his face. A heavy stillness settled over the street, broken only by the wounded man's low whimpering. Doors slammed. Shutters snapped closed. Pale faces watched from behind glass and cracks in wood. Talon had won. And in winning, he had confirmed Slater's accusation. Violence had been brought to the street. When the law arrived, it would not care who reached first. It would only see a wounded white man and an Apache holding a smoking gun. "You're a dead man," Slater hissed, his voice trembling with rage. "Dead, Apache?" "Maybe," Talon replied calmly. "But not today. And not by you." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Leave money for your men with the bartender. Mount your horse. Ride out." With no choices left and Talon's steady gaze pinning him in place, Slater slowly lowered his hand. He backed away, hatred burning bright and absolute in his eyes. He mounted without sparing a glance at the men bleeding in the dirt. A kick of his heels sent the horse lunging forward, and he vanished in a rolling cloud of dust. Talon did not linger. He holstered his pistol, seized the pony's reins, and closed his hand around Eden Whitfield's arm. "We're leaving," he said. "Now." They moved fast, refusing to look back. Bitter Springs was no longer a place to resupply. It had become a marker of how dangerous their path had grown. They rode hard until the light failed, pressing east toward the faint blue line of mountains. When they finally stopped, dusk had settled in, and the truth of their situation came down on them like weight. They were fugitives. Slater would not stop. He would ride to the nearest territorial marshal and tell a tale of a noble rescue and a savage ambush. Vance Whitcomb's money would ensure the story found believers. "We can't keep running like this," Eden said at last. The rush had drained from her voice, leaving deep exhaustion behind. "Sooner or later, they'll trap us." Talon nodded, eyes fixed on the darkening horizon. "You're right." He looked at her, his expression grave. "We don't need a place to hide. We need sanctuary." "There's a mission," he went on. "San Miguel. It's a hard ride, but the priest there, Father Lucien, is a good man. He knew my mother. He trusts God's law more than the territories." As he spoke, a faint, clear sound drifted on the evening breeze. A bell, distant and pure, cutting through heat and fear alike. The call to prayer. It sounded like hope, like the only kind of law that might still protect them. The journey to San Miguel took 3 days. When they finally saw it, it felt unreal. White adobe walls rose stark and luminous against the red hills, a vision of calm in a brutal land. The mission stood for a different kind of endurance, not built on gunfire, but faith. Father Lucien was just as Talon had described. Old, skin the color of cured leather, a face mapped with years. But his eyes were sharp and alive, missing nothing. He greeted Talon with a warm embrace, calling him Hio, son. Then he turned to Eden with gentle curiosity, noting her torn dress, her drawn face, and the way she stayed close to Talon's side. He led them into his cool, quiet study, the air scented with beeswax and old books. He listened without interruption as they told a carefully trimmed version of their story. They spoke of threats from a powerful man, of a disagreement that had turned into a fight for their lives. They said nothing of marriage, nothing of the lies that had bound them together. They did not need to. When they finished speaking, the old priest remained quiet for a long while. His gaze moved between Talon's proud yet troubled face and Eden Whitfield's frightened defiance. He understood what they had chosen not to say. He saw a man bound by an honor he never expected, and a woman fighting for possession of her own soul. The law in this territory, Father Lucien said at last, his voice a dry, gentle rasp, is a tangled thing. It is often bought and sold like cattle. Vance Whitcomb is a wealthy man. His reach extends far. He leaned forward, his dark eyes steady. Sanctuary within these walls is sacred, and I will grant it. You are safe here, for now. Relief struck Eden so hard, her knees nearly gave way. But you must understand, the priest continued, his tone sober. These walls are made of mud and straw. They cannot hold back a federal marshal with a warrant forever. This protection is temporary, a bandage, not a cure. He folded his hands on the scarred wooden desk. If you wish to be truly free of this man, if you want to break the legal hold he has over you, sanctuary alone will not suffice. There is only one thing, in the eyes of the law and in the eyes of God, that can dissolve a marriage. He paused, allowing the silence to bear the weight of what came next. Another marriage. The word settled into the room, not like thunder, but like a door closing. Quiet, final. Another marriage. The idea was so unthinkable that Eden felt her breath leave her entirely. To escape one cage only to step willingly into another felt like cruelty without mercy. She looked at Talon. His face was carved stone, unreadable, but she noticed the tension along his jaw. He was a man who valued his freedom above all things. The thought of legal bonds must have felt like iron around his throat. Father Lucien allowed the silence, respecting the magnitude of what he had placed before them. He poured 3 small cups of cool water from a clay jug, his movements unhurried. This is not a marriage of the heart, he said softly, sensing their turmoil. It is a strategy, a legal shield. We call it a marriage of necessity. The Church recognizes such unions when life and soul require protection. More importantly, the territorial government in Santa Fe recognizes them as well. Once recorded, Vance Whitcomb's claim would end. A woman cannot belong to one husband if she is legally bound to another. And what would this require? Eden asked quietly. Vows, the priest replied simply. Before me and 2 witnesses. Your names entered into the mission ledger. I would send copies to Santa Fe by courier. It would become fact, solid as these adobe walls. They left the study and stepped into the mission courtyard. The late afternoon sun stretched long shadows beneath the cloister arches. In the distance, The peaks of the Sierra Blanca rose pale and distant, their highest ridges dusted with snow that never melted. The sight felt unreal, untouched. A vision of innocence Eden believed she had lost long ago. Talon led her to a stone bench beneath a twisted olive tree. For a long time, he said nothing, his eyes fixed on the white-capped mountains. "He's right," Talon said finally, his voice rough. "Rook Slater won't stop. Whitcomb's money will buy him more men, and a marshal's badge to make it lawful. They will hunt you, and because I'm with you, they will hunt me." He turned to face her, his expression grave. "This is the only way to make that hunt illegal. It turns you from his property into my wife. In their world, that line matters." "And you?" Eden asked softly, her heart tightening. "Your freedom? Your plan to buy land?" "Land means nothing to a dead man," he answered plainly, "and my freedom means nothing if I leave you to them. My mother saved your life. That created a debt. I called you my wife at Cedar Spur to protect you. That created responsibility. My path isn't mine alone anymore," he said quietly. "It's tied to yours." He looked back toward the mountains. "This is paper, a legal fiction. Nothing else between us has to change." She understood what he was offering and what he was not asking for. A name, protection, a shield, nothing in return. It was an act of honor so rare it left her shaken. She thought of her first wedding, grand, gleaming, held beneath cathedral arches in Boston. Flowers, music, promises that turned to ash. She had been traded like property, a merger disguised as love. Her heart had never been part of the bargain. Now, standing in that dust-worn courtyard, Eden Whitfield was being offered something she had never truly known. A sanctuary that did not demand ownership. A marriage not forged by control, but by protection. The choice terrified her, but it was hers. "All right," she said. Her voice surprised even herself with its steadiness. "I will do it." The ceremony was held the following evening inside the mission's small chapel, lit only by candles. The air was cool, carrying the scent of aged wood, melting wax, and the faint sweetness of desert flowers arranged on the plain altar. There were no guests, only those required to bear witness. Esteban Cruz, the cantina owner from Bitter Springs, who had risked himself to warn them of Slater's return, and a quiet elderly nun who tended the mission garden, Sister Mercy. Eden wore a simple dress the nun had given her, clean and carefully mended. Her fiery red hair, the beacon that had betrayed her again and again, was braided tightly and pinned away. Talon stood beside her, no longer dressed in trail-worn buckskins, but in a clean cotton shirt and dark trousers. In the flickering candlelight, he seemed taller somehow, more solid, more formidable. Father Lucian's voice flowed softly through the chapel, a steady murmur of Latin and Spanish. When the moment came for rings, a sudden pang of fear struck Eden. They had none to give. But the priest was ready. He produced a simple silver band, set with a smooth stone of blue-green turquoise. "A gift," he said gently, "from myself and Rafael Cruz, the freighter who carried your warning. Silver from the earth, turquoise from the sky. A reminder of balance." Talon took the ring. His fingers were warm and unwavering as he slid it onto her hand. The metal was cool against her skin. When it was her turn, Eden placed her hand over his. No words, only a silent vow deeper than speech. They signed the heavy leather ledger, Talon, Eden Moore. With the scratch of the pen, Eden Whitfield, once Eden Whitfield Whitcomb, ceased to exist. That night, they were given a small room tucked into a quiet corner of the mission. One bed, a wooden washstand, a single window opening to a sky thick with stars. An unbearable awkwardness settled between them. They were husband and wife in the eyes of God and law, but still strangers, bound by danger and necessity alone. Talon stood at the window, his back to her, watching the night. Eden sat on the edge of the bed, her hands clenched in her lap, her body held tight by a tension she could not name. The memory of her life with Vance Whitcomb pressed in on her, the dread that always followed the closing of a bedroom door. She had been a wife before. She had never been safe. Talon turned. Moonlight carved his face into unfamiliar lines. He stepped toward the bed. Eden froze. She did not cry out. She did not scream. She simply went still, breath shallow, eyes unfocused. A perfect, silent stillness born of long training. The instinct of someone who had learned that motion invited pain. Talon stopped at once. In that single moment, he understood. Not the fear of a stranger, but the deep, learned terror of a woman who had known only cruelty dressed as intimacy. He had seen that look before, in animals broken too young, too harshly. He realized then that the innocence he had sensed in her from the beginning was not of the body, but of the soul. Her trust, her hope, her belief that a man's touch could be gentle, untouched, like snow on the distant Sierra Blanca. Something fierce rose in him, not toward her, but toward the man who had done this. Slowly, deliberately, Talon stepped back. He went to the foot of the bed, lifted a coarse wool blanket, and unfolded it with care. He draped it over her rigid shoulders. His touch was light, impersonal, the way one might soothe a frightened child or a wounded animal. He said nothing. Returning to the window, he gave her distance, the gift of safety. "The stars are different here than in the east," he said softly, breaking the silence. "My people have stories for them." He pointed into the sky. "We see the great bear, but we also see the coyote running across the heavens. That bright one that doesn't flicker, that is the camp of the morning star. The one who brings the dawn," he continued. "A warrior, but a patient one." Eden listened, her body slowly eased beneath the blanket's warmth. His voice became a steady, low rhythm, stories of a world she had never known. "My father used to say love is like fire." Talon went on quietly. His eyes stayed fixed on the spread of stars overhead. "White men often treat love like a prairie fire," Talon said quietly. "Something that burns fierce and fast, devours everything in its way. But that isn't love. That's hunger." He turned slightly, his profile etched in silver light. "My people believe love is a campfire. You build it slow, you feed it, you watch it. You learn when to give it air and when to cover the coals so it survives the night. If you're careless, it will scar you. If you ignore it, it dies. But if you respect it, it will warm you for a lifetime." He fell silent. The only sound left was Eden's breathing, no longer sharp with fear, but uneven, broken. A single tear slid down her cheek, hot and unchecked. Then another. Soon she was crying, not with the wild, choking sobs of her old life, but with the deep, quiet grief of someone finally permitted to mourn. She wept for the girl she had been, for the cruelty she had survived, for the simple, devastating kindness of the man who stood across the room. Talon did not cross the space between them. He understood this sorrow belonged to her alone. He only kept his watch, his presence a steady promise that she was not alone. When the sobs faded into exhausted silence, he spoke again. "You are safe here," he said gently. Eden. It was the first time he had used her name. I will not harm you. You have my word. And for the first time in years, she believed a man. Something knotted inside her chest, something old and rigid, finally loosened. From the ashes of a marriage born of necessity, something fragile and new began to form. Not because of ink on paper, but because of a promise spoken beneath the stars. By morning, Eden was no longer the same woman. The night had been a crucible, burning away the last remains of the frightened creature she had once been. She found Talon in the courtyard, tightening the straps on his saddle. My hair, she said firmly. This color will get us killed. The nuns dye wool with walnut husks. I'll ask them to teach me. I'll make it dark, unremarkable. Talon looked up, startled by her certainty. Then he nodded. That's wise. And I want you to teach me to use a pistol, she added without hesitation. I won't be helpless again. I need to protect myself and us. He studied her face. The resolve there was unmistakable. I will teach you, he said. One more thing, she continued. Sister Blythe weaves blankets. I want to learn. I need a skill. If we're going to Santa Esperanza, I won't be a burden. Talon watched her, awe tightening his chest. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was preparing. 2 days later, their fragile peace shattered. A young boy from a nearby pueblo brought word to the mission. Father Lucian found them in the garden, where Eden was learning how to balance the unfamiliar weight of a revolver in her hand. The priest's face was grave. The message came from Tucson, he said heavily. Vance Whitcomb has doubled the bounty on Eden. And Talon, there is now a price on your head as well. Rook Slater is leading a dozen men. They are no longer riding as hunters. They've convinced a territorial marshal that you are a kidnapper and a murderer. They carry a federal warrant. The words settled like ash in the sunlit courtyard. Suddenly, the mission walls felt thin, fragile. Paper could not stop an army. You must leave, Father Lucian said quietly. The marshal will not honor sanctuary once he arrives. Talon turned to Eden. Her face was pale, but her eyes were steady. She was no longer running from something. Now, she was running toward something, toward Santa Esperanza, toward a life they would have to build together, or not at all. Their journey south was no panicked flight. It was a pilgrimage. Eden's hair, dyed with walnut husks, had darkened to the color of rich soil. It no longer betrayed her. Each evening, Talon patiently guided her through the revolver's weight and balance. It was no longer foreign in her hand. It was becoming responsibility. Under the wide, indifferent sky, they rode not as fugitives alone, but as two people moving toward a future they would have to invent with their own hands. They spoke more openly now, their conversations slowly stitching together two very different worlds. Eden told him about Boston. The glow of gas lamps on snow-covered streets, the hush of grand libraries where time seemed to stop. Talon spoke of his youth, of learning the language of animals and reading stories written in the stars, a life shaped by seasons and weather, not bells and clocks. They first saw Santa Esperanza as a brown smudge against the distant blue of the mountains. As they drew nearer, the town took shape, weathered wood and sun-bleached adobe, rising naturally from the earth. It wasn't planned, it had simply grown. Unlike Cedar Spur or Bitter Springs, Santa Esperanza felt permanent. Smoke drifted from chimneys. Children's laughter mingled with the ring of a blacksmith's hammer. The air carried the sense of chili, horses, and dust. Its people were a living current. Anglo ranchers with stern faces and wide hats, Mexican families rooted here for generations, and Apache families who had chosen compromise over starvation on reservations. They crossed paths in the streets and shared space in the general store, bound by necessity, suspicion, and a hard-earned respect. For the first time since fleeing Colorado, Eden did not feel like an oddity. Here, everyone was from somewhere else. Talon's first stop was the town marshal's office, a modest adobe building with a single barred window and a creaking wooden sign. The man behind the desk looked as worn as the town itself. Broad-shouldered, face carved by sun and years, eyes sharp and assessing. He studied Talon first, then Eden. His gaze paused briefly on the silver and turquoise ring on her finger. "Talon," the marshal said at last, his voice low. "I heard you were breaking mustangs up north." "Plans changed," Talon replied evenly. "Marshal Owen Pike, this is my wife, Eden." Marshal Pike rose and inclined his head to her, a gesture of respect not often given. A silent understanding passed between the two men. Years ago, during a bandit skirmish, Talon had pulled Pike from a ravine under fire. The debt had never been named, but it had never been forgotten. "We're looking to stay," Talon said. "Work. Build a life." Pike leaned back, weighing him. Santa Esperanza was always short on men he could trust. "The council approved funds for a deputy," Pike said casually. "Pay's thin, work's rough, and some ranchers won't like an Apache wearing a star." He let the warning settle, but the offer stands. It was more than a job. It was protection. A badge meant legitimacy. It shifted Talon from hunted to lawful. "I'll take it," Talon said without hesitation. Word of his appointment moved through town like a hot wind. Mexican and Apache families saw fairness in it. Others did not. A group of influential Anglo ranchers, led by a hard-eyed man named Briggs Croft, made their displeasure clear. To them, law was a tool for property and power, and they didn't intend to share it. While Talon learned the currents of his new role, Eden found her own calling. She noticed the children, wild, curious, from every background, with no school to shape their futures. An idea took root, bold enough to frighten her. Education had been denied her voice in marriage, but it was her strength. She brought the idea to Marshal Pike and Cade Miller, the practical store owner who served as Santa Esperanza's unofficial mayor. "A school," she said steadily. "For all the children. They'll learn to read and write English, but also more. They'll learn the desert stories Talon's people tell. They'll learn the Spanish songs their mothers sing." Her hands were clasped tight, but her voice did not waver. "It won't erase who they are," Eden said steadily. "It will help them understand one another." Cade Miller frowned, already calculating costs and imagining trouble. But Marshal Owen Pike saw the same quiet determination in Eden that he had seen in Talon. He gave a short nod. The school was approved. They were given an abandoned storeroom behind the general store. Eden set to work immediately, her spirit lifting with a sense of purpose she had never known. The little school became a reflection of Santa Esperanza itself, a fragile bridge between worlds, a place where children might learn what their parents had never been taught. Talon and Eden rented a modest 2-room adobe on the edge of town. It wasn't much, but it belonged to them. For the first time, they shared meals at a table instead of beside a fire. Eden planted a small garden out back, coaxing stubborn desert roses from the dry ground. In those quiet moments, the marriage born of necessity began to feel like something deeper. They weren't pretending anymore. They were building, brick by dusty brick. One afternoon, a wiry mail rider arrived on a fast pony and handed over a letter addressed to Mrs. Eden Moore, care of the marshal's office. Eden's heart thudded as she recognized the careful script. It was from Maeve Hartwell, her aunt in Boston. The letter was brief, but heavy with worry. Maeve had received Eden's coded message sent before she fled Colorado, and she was coming west. The past was reaching for her again, not with violence, but with family. The thought filled Eden with both dread and a fragile, aching hope. As summer deepened, drought settled over the valley. The sky stayed pitilessly blue. The creek thinned. The town well became the gathering point for everyone, the single source of life. Tempers rose with the heat. Cattle grew lean. Patience wore thin. The crisis struck on a blistering afternoon. Thunderheads built over the mountains, but gave no rain. A lightning strike ignited dry grass miles away, and the wind carried the fire straight toward the ranch lands. Panic broke loose. Buckets and shovels appeared, but the effort was scattered and useless. The fire roared forward, a living wall of heat and smoke. That was when Talon took command. He rode straight to the front, his voice cutting through the chaos. Buckets won't stop this. We need a firebreak now. He pointed sharply. Briggs Croft, your men have the strongest plows. Start cutting a line from the creek bed to the rock ridge. Cade Miller, get every wet blanket and sack you can find. We'll beat back the edges. The authority in his voice left no room for argument. Not even Croft challenged him. Talon worked beside them, face blackened with soot, eyes burning from smoke. He read the wind, anticipated the fire's turns, and showed them how to fight it. For 4 brutal hours, the entire town labored as one. By nightfall, the firebreak held. Deprived of fuel, the blaze began to die. The land was scarred black, the air thick with smoke. But Santa Esperanza stood. That night, no one looked away when Talon entered the saloon. Men who had once muttered now clasped his shoulder. Briggs Croft, grim and ash-streaked, stepped forward and held out his hand. "I was wrong about you," he said roughly. "You saved us." Talon shook his hand. It wasn't friendship, but it was respect. And in Santa Esperanza, that mattered more. For a brief time, peace settled over the town. Eden School flourished. Talon was no longer seen as just the Apache deputy, but as a leader. For the first time, their hope felt real. Then, 1 week later, a rider galloped into town long after dark, his horse lathered, legs trembling, carrying news that shattered the fragile calm. It was Rafael Cruz, the freighter, the same man who had warned them at the mission. He brought word straight from Father Lucien, his expression tight with urgency. Talon met him inside the marshal's office. A single oil lamp burned on the desk, throwing long shadows across the adobe walls. "Vance Whitcomb has abandoned the law," Raphael said quietly. "He knows the marriage is on record. He knows a warrant won't hold." Talon went utterly still. "Then what has he done?" "He bought an army," Raphael replied. "Rooks, Slater, and 20 hard men. Not deputies, not bounty hunters. They're not riding into Santa Esperanza," Raphael continued, leaning over the desk and dragging a finger through the dust. "They know you wear the law here." He marked a narrow line, the supply trail to Tucson, 10 miles out. A canyon they call Coyote Narrows. There's no way around it. "They're waiting there," he finished. "They don't plan to arrest you, Talon. They plan to kill you." The words settled like a gravestone. Eden stood beside Talon, her hand resting on his arm, not clinging, not shaking. The woman who had once known only fear now stood steady, pale-faced but unbroken. The desert had burned away her panic, leaving resolve in its place. "We can't stay," Talon said finally. "They'd lay siege to the town." "And you can't run," Marshal Owen Pike added grimly. "There isn't a corner of this territory they won't search." He looked from Talon to Eden. "Which means you go through them." Silence followed. Then Talon spoke again, thinking aloud. "They'll expect us to flee. 2 riders against 20. They'll be arrogant." "That's where they'll fail," Pike said, a thin smile touching his mouth. He crossed to the window, gazing out at the sleeping town. "You're not a fugitive anymore, Talon. You're a deputy of Santa Esperanza. An attack on you is an attack on the town." He turned back. "I can't officially send you into an ambush, but I can send word. The Ash Ridge Riders are camped in the Dragoon Mountains, less than a day's ride beyond the Narrows. Their leader and I have an understanding, and he hasn't forgotten that you are one of them." The plan was desperate, a trap set inside a trap. Talon and Eden would ride as expected, as if bound for Tucson. They would draw Slater's men out and hold long enough for help to arrive. It was a gamble built on loyalty and on survival. 2 nights later, beneath a razor-thin moon, they entered Coyote Narrows. The canyon walls rose like dark jaws on either side, swallowing the stars. The air was cold and unmoving. Hooves whispered against sand. A narrow stream glimmered nearby, catching shards of moonlight like scattered silver. Beautiful. Deadly. Talon rode with his rifle across his knees, every sense stretched tight. He read the silence, tasted the wind, watched the shadows where stone met night. Eden followed close behind. The revolver at her hip felt solid, familiar. Her heart beat hard, not with terror, but with readiness. She was no longer fleeing. She was standing. The first shot cracked without warning. Stone exploded where Talon's head had been a breath earlier. Bullets screamed through the canyon. They moved instantly. Talon slid from his saddle, firing into a muzzle flash above. Eden dragged the horses into scrub oak, fast and precise. "Low," Talon called. "Move rock to rock." Gunfire erupted from both sides. A perfect crossfire. Eden did not freeze. She moved. She pressed her back to a slab of granite, the stone cold and steady against her cheek. In her head, Talon's lessons came back with sharp clarity, as if he were right beside her. Breathe, steady your shoulders, squeeze the trigger, don't jerk it. She leaned out just enough to see a shape on the ridgeline, a man cut dark against the sky. Eden lifted the revolver in both hands, drew a slow breath, and squeezed. The gun kicked hard, the blast echoing off the canyon walls. The shadow vanished. She didn't know if she'd struck him, but she'd forced him down. She had answered the attack. Talon moved through the darkness like a wraith. He wasn't trying to win a stand-up fight. He was buying time, breaking their rhythm, keeping them off balance. He fired, shifted, fired again. Every shot was measured. This wasn't the savage of their fevered stories. This was a trained scout, a calculating deputy. He aimed for hands and legs, shattered confidence, knocked weapons loose. Confusion spread among them. The canyon roared. Gunshots cracking, bullets spanging off a rock, curses shouted from unseen throats. For what felt like hours, the 2 of them held back far too many men, their resistance a stubborn spark in the dark. But the pressure grew. Too many guns, too much fire. They were being pinned. Then a new voice cut through the chaos, sharp with arrogance and rage. "Enough! I want her alive." A figure stepped out from behind a massive rock on the canyon floor, ground that should have been safe. It was Vance Whitcomb. His impatience had exposed him. Moonlight caught his pale, furious face and the polished, silver-inlaid pistol in his hand. A gentleman's toy, absurd in this brutal place. "Eden," he shouted, his voice cracking with possession. "This ends now. You're mine. I won't be defied by a savage and a runaway whore." Time slowed. Talon saw him clearly. The shot was there, clean and easy. Every injustice, every mile of flight, every threat converged into a single burning point. He could end it. End the man who had terrorized his wife, put prices on lives, and dragged this slaughter into the canyon. His finger found the trigger. Then he saw the star on his chest. Saw Santa Esperanza, its faces, its children. Saw Eden, not with hatred in her eyes, but fierce resolve. He was not an executioner. He was the law. Talon adjusted his aim by a hair. The rifle cracked. Whitcomb screamed, a thin, shocked sound. His pistol flew from his grasp and clattered on stone as he dropped to his knees, clutching a hand ruined and bleeding. Then another sound rolled in, deeper than gunfire. Hooves, many hooves, hammering rock from the far end of the canyon. High, piercing cries rang from the cliffs, a sound that chilled the hired men to the bone. Out of the dark surged the Ash Ridge riders, lean shapes moving as one, riding with the force of a storm. At their front rode their leader, eyes bright and intent. The ambush broke. The riders swept the canyon clean, precise and relentless. Men paid to bully, not to fight a war, panicked and scattered. Some threw down their guns and begged. Others fled into the rocks and were hunted down. Talon rose and crossed the canyon floor to Whitcomb. He hauled the man up and bound his hands behind his back, grim satisfaction settling in. The fight was finished. Minutes later, Marshal Owen Pike arrived with a small posse, faces set hard. The leader of the Ash Ridge Riders reined in beside Talon. A brief nod passed between them. Respect, history, and trust without words. Law and kin had met in Coyote Narrows and delivered a different kind of justice. As they led the prisoners away, Vance Whitcomb suddenly staggered. His face went ashen, sweat beading at his brow. He clutched his chest, eyes wide, not with fear of capture, but with a deeper, sudden terror. He staggered, then collapsed to his knees. A wet, strangled sound tore from his throat before he pitched forward. Marshal Owen Pike was beside him in an instant, fingers searching for a pulse that was already gone. "His heart," Pike said quietly. There was nothing more to do. Vance Whitcomb had not fallen to a bullet. He had been undone by the fury and hatred that had poisoned him from the inside out. In the confusion that followed, a shadow peeled itself away from the canyon wall and vanished into the deepest dark. From high above, a voice rang out, sharp with promise and venom. "This isn't finished," it shouted. "Talon, I'll see you in hell for this." It was Rook Slater. He had escaped. Talon pulled Eden into his arms as the echoes died. They were alive. That was what mattered. At their feet, the creek caught the moonlight, a ribbon of silver leading them out of the canyon of death and back toward the fragile idea of home. They had won the fight. But as Talon stared into the shadows where Slater had disappeared, he knew the war for their peace was not finished. They returned to Santa Esperanza, not as heroes, but as survivors. The town greeted them with a quiet respect far deeper than any celebration. The story of Coyote Narrows spread through the valley and hardened into legend. The deputy and his wife, who had faced an army and endured through discipline, courage, and the loyalty of allies. The captured gunmen were locked in the small town jail, awaiting transport to federal court in Tucson. News of Whitcomb's ignoble end followed soon after, closing a dark chapter. Yet every telling ended with the same whispered question, asked in the saloon and the general store alike. Where was Slater? The bounty hunter had vanished like smoke on the wind, leaving behind a silence more threatening than open violence. Life in Santa Esperanza slowly found a new rhythm. Roman, now Talon in name and deed, stood secure in his position, his authority rooted not only in the badge on his chest, but in the trust he had earned. Eden School became the heart of the town's fragile harmony. Apache, Mexican, and Anglo children sat together, learning their letters, then listening wide-eyed as Eden retold one of Talon's desert stories. It was a quiet miracle, repeated every day. The letter from Maeve Hartwell said she would arrive on the late autumn stagecoach. When the day came, Eden could not keep still. She paced the small adobe house, smoothing the front of her best dress, a simple calico she had sewn herself. "She'll judge me," Eden said tightly. "She'll see this place, see you, and think I've fallen into savagery." "Let her see," Talon replied calmly. "She'll see a woman who is strong, a woman who is alive. If she can't see that, then her eyes are the ones that fail." When the stagecoach finally rolled in, trailing dust, a woman descended who looked every inch the Boston matriarch Eden had described. Maeve Hartwell stood tall and straight, wrapped in a dark gray traveling dress, silver hair pinned in a flawless bun. She surveyed the street with restrained disapproval, and Eden's heart sank. Then Maeve's eyes found her niece. The severity in her face cracked. For a moment, she looked not like a judge, but like a woman seeing a ghost she loved. She crossed the distance quickly, gloved hands closing around Eden's. "My dear child," she whispered, emotion thick in her voice. "You're safe. That's all that matters." Their reunion unfolded stiffly over tea in the small front room. Maeve sat straight-backed on a wooden chair, her posture at odds with the rustic furniture. Yet her eyes softened as she watched Eden move about her own home. Eden told her story carefully, of an unhappy marriage, of flight, of a man who had offered protection. She left out the blood and terror. But Maeve, who had spent a lifetime reading what went unsaid, understood the rest. When Eden finished, Maeve was quiet for a long while. Her gaze moved to Talon, seated watchfully in the corner, then to the simple silver and turquoise ring on Eden's finger. "When I was young," Maeve said at last, her voice so soft Eden had to lean in, "there was a man, a fisherman from Gloucester. Your grandfather forbade me from seeing him. He wasn't of our station." She looked down at the ornate gold ring on her own hand, the emblem of a long, respectable, and passionless marriage to a Boston banker. "I was told it was my duty," she said quietly. "I did my duty," Maeve Hartwell said quietly, "and I have regretted it every day of my life." She lifted her gaze, and tears shone in her sharp, discerning eyes. "You, my dear, did not make the same mistake. You chose life. You chose freedom. Your mother would have been so proud of you." In that instant, the last wall between them gave way. Eden broke down, and her aunt gathered her close. The stiff silk of Maeve's traveling dress was an unexpected comfort as Eden wept, grief and relief pouring out together. Later that evening, Maeve opened a trunk and drew out a thick envelope of legal papers. "Your father was more sentimental than he ever let on," she said. "He was never at peace with your marriage to Vance Whitcomb. Before he died, he believed he had failed to protect you. He amended his will," Maeve continued. "He left you a small inheritance, a trust in your own name, separate from any husband. It isn't a fortune, she added gently, but he hoped it would give you independence. Eden stared at the documents, at her father's thin, familiar signature. It was enough, more than enough. Enough for lumber and books. Enough to add another room to the school. Enough to hire a young Mexican woman to help her teach. Enough to anchor her dream in solid ground. The school of Santa Esperanza was no longer just hope. It was becoming real. Weeks later, a quieter joy settled into their home. Eden was pregnant. They kept the knowledge to themselves at first, guarding it like something delicate and sacred. Eden felt an unfamiliar harmony, as if her body and her life had finally aligned. Yet as her joy deepened, she noticed a shadow growing in Talon's eyes. He grew more vigilant, more withdrawn. At night, she sometimes woke to find him standing at the window, watching the desert as though expecting it to strike back. One evening, as they sat on the porch and watched the stars bloom across the dark sky, she finally asked, "I'm afraid," Talon said, the words torn from him. It shocked her, this confession from a man who seemed to fear nothing. "My people have lost so much," he went on. "My parents were killed when I was a boy. Soldiers came. They took everything. A life, a family. It feels dangerous to be this happy," he said quietly, "like I'm daring history to repeat itself." The pain ran too deep for Eden to heal alone. The next day she spoke to her aunt. That afternoon, Maeve found Talon by the corral, repairing a bridle. "Eden tells me you're going to be a father," she said plainly. Talon nodded, his hands going still. "She also tells me you're afraid." He didn't deny it. He met her eyes, the torment there unguarded. "Let me tell you about Eden's mother," Maeve said. "My sister Margaret. She was never strong in body," Maeve continued. "She was frail, often ill. But her spirit was like a river. Gentle, but relentless. She loved a world that was often cruel to her, and she gave beauty wherever she went. She taught Eden to love books, to see poetry in the ordinary, to choose kindness. That strength lives in Eden," Maeve said softly, "and it will live in your child." She spoke of Eden's childhood, of quiet courage and patience. She traced a lineage of resilience, from Nokai, the healer who had saved Talon's mother, to Margaret the poet, and now to Eden. "You are not inviting tragedy," Maeve told him. "You are building continuity, survival. When the child is born," she said, "give them names that honor that chain." That night, as Talon read from his mother's journal by lamplight, the voices of Nokai and Margaret seemed to merge in his mind. He looked at Eden, her belly just beginning to round, and felt the fear in him give way to something steadier. Purpose. He was more than a husband, more than a deputy. He was a guardian of what endured. Behind the house, the desert roses Eden had planted, meant to sleep through the cold, suddenly burst into bloom. Pink blossoms flared against the brown earth, a quiet rebellion against the seasons. It felt like a blessing. A month later, the outside world intruded, not with gunfire, but with formality. A man in a black suit arrived on the morning stage. His manner was dry, his expression unreadable. He introduced himself as Mr. Fields from the Bureau of Indian Affairs and requested a meeting with the town leadership. He waited for them inside the general store. His documents were arranged with meticulous care across the counter. He spoke smoothly of progress, of civilization, of a new federal effort meant, so he claimed, to uplift Native children across the territory. "The Carlisle Indian Industrial School in Pennsylvania," he announced, his tone steeped in moral certainty, stands as a beacon of hope. It is a place where these children can be rescued from unfortunate circumstances. They will learn English, a practical trade, and Christian principles. They will be prepared to enter modern American society. His gaze moved deliberately around the room, over the Apache and Mexican parents, over Talon and Eden. We are compiling a list of children in this district eligible for this opportunity, he said, lips tightening into a thin smile. All native children, and those of mixed blood, will be required to attend. It is for their benefit, he continued. The only way to free them from the blanket and the teepee, to save them from the backward customs of their people. The words fell into the silence of the general store like stones dropped into still water. Shock rippled outward, followed by fear. Mr. Fields, with his black suit and tidy stack of papers, posed a danger more insidious than Rook Slater and his guns. He carried no revolver, only the righteous authority of the United States government. He did not seek their lives. He sought their children, cloaking the theft in the language of mercy. That evening, Santa Esperanza gathered inside the half-finished community hall. Lanterns swayed overhead, throwing restless shadows across the strained faces of Apache, Mexican, and Anglo parents alike. Mr. Fields stood at the front, composed and confident, outlining the benevolent logic of his plan. He described a future where native children would become indistinguishable from white ones, where their languages were erased, their histories severed, all in the name of advancement. When he finished, the room sat heavy with silence. Then Eden stood. Her hand rested instinctively on her swelling belly, a quiet, protective gesture. Every eye turned toward the town schoolteacher. "Mr. Fields," she said, her voice steady and clear, carrying to every corner of the hall. "You speak of opportunity. But what is an opportunity worth if it costs a child his soul? If it teaches him that his parents are ignorant and his ancestors savage?" She looked around at the parents of her students. "In my classroom, the children learn to read and write English. Yes. But they also learn the Apache names for the stars. They sing Spanish songs that have echoed through this valley for generations. They learn that a person can hold two worlds in their heart, not just one. You say you want to save them from the blanket. We want a world where they never have to choose between a blanket and a book." A murmur of agreement swept through the crowd. Talon stood beside her, silent, immovable, a living anchor. When he spoke, he did not raise his voice. "A plant cannot survive if you cut it from its roots," he said simply. "It will wither and die. A child is no different. Take them from their people, from their land, and you are not giving them a future. You are stealing their past and leaving them with nothing." From the back wall, Marshal Owen Pike pushed forward. "This is a town governed by law," he said, his voice low and iron-hard. "And the law exists to protect families, not tear them apart. These people are not wards of the state. They are residents of Santa Esperanza, and I will not allow their children to be taken against their will." Another voice joined in, calm, resonant, unwavering. It was Father Lucien, who had ridden in from the mission the moment he heard the news. "The Lord commands us to honor our fathers and mothers," the priest said. "It is a sin to teach a child to be ashamed of their own blood. Education should be a light that guides a child's path, not a fire that burns the bridge back to home." The resistance was formidable. Still, Mr. Fields raised a hand, irritation flickering across his face. "Your sentiments are noted," he said coolly. "But this is a federal directive. I have the authority. Do you? The interruption was crisp, unmistakable. All heads turned to the rear of the hall, where Maeve Hartwell stood, rigid, composed, unyielding as carved stone. Do you truly possess the authority, she asked, to remove children by force without due process? In direct violation of their rights as citizens of this territory? I have been corresponding with Senator Dawes's office, she continued evenly, and with the War Department under which your bureau operates. And I assure you, sir, they will be very interested in how you answer that question. They seemed convinced the program was entirely voluntary. I suspect, Maeve Hartwell said coolly, that officials in Washington would be very interested to learn of your more forceful interpretation of that policy. She lifted a thick bundle of telegrams. She had not been idle while the town prepared for a battle of hearts and conscience. Maeve had been waging a quieter war. Ink and influence, messages, inquiries, and carefully worded warnings had already been sent east, drawn from family connections cultivated over generations. Sensing their moment, the community moved as one. That very night, a petition was drafted on the scarred counter of the general store. Names filled the page: Mexican shopkeepers, Apache elders, and in a moment that sealed the town's unity, Briggs Croft and the other Anglo ranchers. An attack on one family, they now understood, was an attack on all. Confronted by a united town, a marshal who would not bend, and an unexpected political storm stirred by a formidable woman from Boston, Mr. Fields found his position impossible. 2 days later, he boarded the stagecoach, his face tight with bitter defeat. This matter is not concluded, he said stiffly. It is merely postponed. But everyone knew the truth. They had won, not with rifles, but with a single, unbroken voice. Months passed. Late autumn's chills softened into a mild winter. The new wing of the Santa Esperanza Bilingual School began to rise. Built with lumber purchased from the inheritance and the willing hands of townsfolk. And in the small adobe house with desert roses blooming behind it, Eden gave birth to a daughter. The child was strong and healthy, with Eden's fair skin and Talon's dark, observant eyes. They named her Nokai Margaret, for the Apache healer and the Boston poet, 2 women whose quiet strength had guided them here. One night, beneath a full moon and a clean, cool sky, Talon wrapped the sleeping baby in a wool blanket and looked at Eden. She understood without words. They saddled their horses and rode out, leaving the lamplit hush of Santa Esperanza behind. The desert stretched before them, silver and shadowed, transformed into a dream beneath the moon. They did not stop until they reached a familiar place, the shallow bend of Bitter Wash. Here, where their journey had first begun, the creek shimmered like molten light. Talon dismounted, helped Eden down, and placed their daughter gently in her arms. Together, they stepped into the water, cool against their ankles. The same moon, the same stream, but they were no longer the same people. This is where I first called you my wife, Talon said quietly, the vast silence carrying his words. That night, it was to save us. Tonight, it is where we choose each other. To live. He looked at the small, perfect face of his daughter, then at Eden. His wife in truth, not merely by law. His chest felt too full to contain what he carried. I took you as my Apache bride by fate, he murmured. But in the mission, I saw your spirit was untouched. Your innocence was like snow on the mountains. I chose to wait for our season. Eden reached up and touched his face, her eyes bright with tears born not of sorrow, but of fierce, aching joy. Because of you, Talon, she said softly. That snow was never trampled. It melted into water for the desert of my life. He kissed her then, a kiss of belonging, of patience, fulfilled. Somewhere in the distance, a lone coyote lifted its voice to the moon, wild and beautiful. Near the bank, a desert rose, descended from those Eden had once planted, released its quiet fragrance into the night. The future was uncertain. Rook Slater still lived, a shadow beyond the horizon. Hard seasons would return. But there, in the water where fate had first bound them, they stood as a family, rooted, enduring, ready to face whatever seasons lay ahead. Finally, let me send my deep thanks to you. Thank you for being here and letting this story live within your heart. If it moved you, I hope you'll walk beside us through more journeys of the Wild West, stories filled with truth, endurance, and grace. Subscribe, share your thoughts, and stay close. Together, we'll keep riding across these wide-open lands of memory and hope. Thank you. Aviso legal barra disclaimer. Our narratives bring inspiration from the past, recreated with fictional and dramatized interpretations for entertainment purposes only. AI tools serve as creative support, but the storytelling, editing, and emotional refinement are handled by our team to guarantee authenticity. We comply with content policies for AI use, avoiding impersonations, identity fabrication, or historically misleading images. All visual and audio content is legally sourced. Redistribution or modification requires prior written approval. Thank you for honoring creativity, collaboration, and storytelling done with heart.